The Battle of Gettysburg was fought from July 1 to July 3, 1863, in and around the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, by Union and Confederate forces during the American Civil War. In the battle, Union Major General George Meade's Army of the Potomac defeated attacks by Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, halting Lee's invasion of the North. This battle is considered the most important engagement of the American Civil War. In May 1863, Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army of Northern Virginia had scored a smashing victory over the Army of the Potomac at Chancellorsville. Brimming with confidence, Lee decided to go on the offensive and invade the North for a second time. The first invasion had ended at Antietam the previous fall. In addition to bringing the conflict out of Virginia and diverting Northern troops from Vicksburg, where the Confederates were under siege, Lee hoped to gain recognition of the Confederacy by Britain and France and strengthen the cause of Northern Copperheads who favored peace. On the Union side, President Abraham Lincoln had lost confidence in the Army of the Potomac's commander Joseph Hooker, who seemed reluctant to confront Lee's army after the defeat at Chancellorsville. On June 28, Lincoln named Major General George Gordon Meade to succeed Hooker. Meade immediately ordered the pursuit of Lee's army of 75,000, which by then had crossed the Potomac River into Maryland and marched on into southern Pennsylvania. Upon learning that the Army of the Potomac was on its way, Lee planned to assemble his army in the prosperous crossroads town of Gettysburg, 35 miles southwest of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. One of the Confederate divisions in A.P. Hill's command approached the town in search of supplies early on July 1, only to find that 2 Union cavalry brigades had arrived the previous day. As the bulk of both armies headed toward Gettysburg, Confederate forces, led by Hill and Richard Ewell, were able to drive the outnumbered Federal defenders back through town to Cemetery Hill located a half-mile to the south. Seeking to press his advantage before more Union troops could arrive, Lee gave discretionary orders to attack Cemetery Hill to Ewell, who had taken command of the Army of Northern Virginia's 2nd Corps after Lee's most trusted general, Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, was mortally wounded at Chancellorsville. Ewell declined to order the attack, considering the Federal position too strong. His reticence would earn him many unfavorable comparisons to the Great Stonewall. By dusk, a Union corps under Winfield Scott Hancock had arrived and extended the defensive line along Cemetery Ridge to the hill known as Little Round Top. 3 more Union corps arrived overnight to strengthen its defenses. Throughout the evening of July 1 and morning of July 2, most of the remaining infantry of both armies arrived on the field, including the Union 2, 3, 5, 6, and 12 Corps. 2 of Longstreet's divisions were on the road. Brigadier General George Pickett had begun the 22-mile (35 kilometers) march from Chambersburg, while Brigadier General Evander M. Law had begun the march from Guilford. Both arrived late in the morning. Law completed his 28-mile (45 kilometers) march in 11 hours. The Union line ran from Culp's Hill southeast of the town northwest to Cemetery Hill just south of town. Then south for nearly 2 miles, 3 kilometers, along Cemetery Ridge, terminating just north of Little Round Top. Most of the 12 Corps was on Culp's Hill. The remnants of 1 and 11 Corps defended Cemetery Hill, 2 Corps covered most of the northern half of Cemetery Ridge, and 3 Corps was ordered to take up a position to its flank. The shape of the Union line is popularly described as a fishhook formation. The Confederate line paralleled the Union line about a mile, 1,600 meters, to the west on Seminary Ridge. Ran east through the town, then curved southeast to a point opposite Culp's Hill. Thus, the Union Army had interior lines, while the Confederate line was nearly 5 miles, 8 kilometers, long. Lee assessed his enemy's positions and determined, against the advice of his defensively minded second-in-command, James Longstreet, to attack the Federals where they stood. He ordered Longstreet to lead an attack on the Union left while Ewell's corps would strike the right near Culp's Hill. Though his orders were to attack as early in the day as possible, Longstreet didn't get his men into position until 4 p.m., when they opened fire on the Union corps commanded by Daniel Sickles. Over the next several hours, bloody fighting raged along Sickles' line, which stretched from the nest of boulders known as Devil's Den into a peach orchard, as well as in a nearby wheat field and on the slopes of Little Round Top. McLaws, coming in on Hood's left, drove multiple attacks into the thinly stretched three corps in the wheat field and overwhelmed them in Sherfy's peach orchard. McLaws's attack eventually reached Plum Run Valley, the Valley of Death, before being beaten back by the Pennsylvania Reserve's division of the V Corps. Moving down from Little Round Top, the III Corps was virtually destroyed as a combat unit in this battle, and Sickles's leg was amputated after it was shattered by a cannonball. Caldwell's division was destroyed piecemeal in the wheat field. Anderson's division, coming from McLaws's left and starting forward around 6 p.m., reached the crest of Cemetery Ridge, but could not hold the position in the face of counterattacks from the two corps, including an almost suicidal bayonet charge by the 1st Minnesota Regiment against a Confederate brigade, ordered in desperation by Hancock to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. As fighting raged in the wheat field and Devil's Den, Colonel Strong Vincent of 5 Corps had a precarious hold on Little Round Top, an important hill at the extreme left of the Union line. His brigade of 4 relatively small regiments was able to resist repeated assaults by Law's brigade of Hood's division. Meade's chief engineer, Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren, had realized the importance of this position, and dispatched Vincent's brigade, an artillery battery, and the 140th New York to occupy Little Round Top mere minutes before Hood's troops arrived. The defense of Little Round Top with a bayonet charge by the 20th Maine, ordered by Colonel Joshua L. Chamberlain but possibly led by Lieutenant Holman S. Melcher, was one of the most fabled episodes in the Civil War and propelled Chamberlain into prominence after the war. Thanks to fierce fighting by the Maine Regiment, the Federals were able to hold Little Round Top, but lost the Orchard Field and Devil's Denver. Ewell's men had advanced on the Union forces on the right at Culp's Hill and East Cemetery Hill in coordination with Longstreet's 4 p.m. attack, but Union forces had stalled their attack by dusk. Both armies suffered extremely heavy losses on July 2, with 9,000 or more casualties on each side. The combined casualty total from 2 days of fighting came to nearly 35,000. The largest two-day toll of the war. Lee wished to renew the attack on the third day, Friday, July 3, using the same basic plan as the previous day. Longstreet would attack the Union left, while Ewell attacked Culp's Hill. Meade, on the other hand, was less confident, and it was only after a formal council of war that he decided to stay and fight. However, early on the morning of July 3, before Longstreet was ready, Union 12 Corps troops started a dawn artillery bombardment against the Confederates on Culp's Hill in an effort to regain a portion of their lost works. The Confederates attacked, and the second fight for Culp's Hill ended around 11 a.m., after some 7 hours of bitter combat. The Union line was intact and held more strongly than before. Believing his men had been on the brink of victory the day before, Lee decided to send 3 divisions, preceded by an artillery barrage, against the Union center on Cemetery Ridge. Fewer than 15,000 troops, led by a division under George Pickett, would be tasked with marching some 3/4 of a mile across open fields to attack dug-in Union infantry positions. Despite Longstreet's protests, Lee was determined, and the attack, later known as Pickett's Charge, went forward around 3 p.m. At 3 p.m. the infantry moved out of the woods in parade ground order and started across the 1,400 yards, 1,280 meters, of open fields towards Cemetery Ridge. The Federals watched in awed silence as some 15,000 Confederate troops moved toward them. Then the Federal artillery, which had ceased fire an hour earlier to save ammunition, went back into action with devastating effect at a range of about 700 yards, 640 meters. Almost unscathed by the Confederate artillery preparation, most of which had gone over their heads. The roughly 10,000 Federal infantry against whom the attack was directed waited coolly behind stone walls and held their fire until the Confederates were within effective range. The southern spearhead broke through and penetrated onto Cemetery Ridge, but there it could do no more. Critically weakened by artillery during their approach, formations hopelessly tangled, lacking reinforcement, and under savage attack from 3 sides, they marked the high tide of the Confederacy with the bodies of their dead and wounded. Barely half of the Confederates survived, and Pickett's division lost 2/3 of its men. As the survivors stumbled back to their opening position, Lee and Longstreet scrambled to shore up their defensive line. Leaving 19 battle flags and hundreds of prisoners, the Confederates retreated, demoralized but without panic. Part of one Union brigade advanced to hasten their retreat, but the Army of the Potomac had been too roughly handled to mount a counterattack. His hopes of a victorious invasion of the North dashed. Lee waited for a Union counterattack on July 4, but it never came. That night, in heavy rain, the Confederate general withdrew his decimated army toward Virginia. The Union had won the Battle of Gettysburg.